So our presenter today is Abby Ghattas. Abby's a director of operations for Wecounsel, and she's spent her whole career helping healthcare providers optimize their practices, increase revenue, and comply with state and federal regulations. So she's going to be presenting to us today about telehealth and some things to consider surrounding that topic. So with that, I'll go ahead and pass it over to you, Abby.
Thanks, Tyler. It's a pleasure being here. Thanks, everyone, for joining. Really excited to talk with you about telehealth and client safety, and as well explain to you the partnership that NASW, Pennsylvania, and Wecounsel have created. Today, our topic, in case you're not sure, is about telehealth in your practice, and how to really practice telehealth and offer that service with your patient's safety and security in mind. If you're not familiar with Wecounsel, we're a software company, and what we offer is a program that allows you to connect with your clients remotely, and that could be in a number of ways. We have a secure HIPAA compliant video conferencing, secure and HIPAA compliant email and messaging and texting component, as well as document storage and sharing, and a number of other things that makes it easy for you to not only manage your practice, but as well as use the telehealth remote care avenue as a way to furnish your services. So that being said, I do like to let everyone know when I give webinars that I'm not a clinician or a lawyer. So if you're looking for clinical or legal advice, you should probably consult with your professional liability company, and of course, the best practice guidelines from your associations and memberships, because they're going to give you the best information when it comes to that. What I do is telemedicine. So I can give you tons of information about security and approach, and my entire career has been in practice management, and I've worked in behavioral practices as well as neurosurgery, and really familiar with assisting providers in giving optimal service in those areas. So with that said, let's go ahead and look at what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to talk about how to set up your online practice for success. So whether you're in private practice or you're working in a group or organization, there are some things that you can do to be the most successful online as opposed to in person. So we'll hit on some of those points, and that's a really big portion of today's discussion. We're also going to talk about communicating your expectations and boundaries, which is really important in just everyday practice, but becomes even more significant when you're dealing with your services being furnished remotely. And also, because video conferencing is a huge part of telehealth, we'll be discussing best practices for video conferencing. And of course, I have some resources to point you to where you can get information about your professional association's best practice guidelines as well. We'll also be talking about transitioning care as it relates to telehealth and remote care, and some things to consider in that arena. And then at the end today, we'll be able to do some question and answers. I also want to point out that I may have met some of you, or you may have seen me at the NASW Pennsylvania conference, this past conference, and I just want to thank you for welcoming me to that conference when I did come to present and also sponsor. It was really fun. I really enjoyed the Kalahari, so good job organizers of that conference, and just really enjoyed meeting all of you and discussing telehealth. It sounds like your community is very inspired to do telehealth, and that's what, you know, our whole goal as a company is to connect providers and clients remotely and allow that technology to bridge the gap and lack of access that exists in healthcare, especially and so thank you for being aware and interested. And first topic is setting up your online practice for success. And, you know, when you're thinking about how to set up your practice, there are some things that you should run through your head. And this doesn't really matter whether we're talking about a private practice here or an organization. This is applicable across the board. So first thing is, in some states, it's required that there be an in-person session to establish care before a telehealth or a remote session can be had. So you'll want to make sure to check with your professional licensure board to see if your state is one of those states. If you hold licensure in multiple states, then you may have to follow different rules for each of those states. So it's important for you to track for every state in which you're licensed, and that's going to be the case no matter what. Now, sure, this is something that you're used to dealing with in other areas of clinical practice, and that's no different for telehealth. So each state has their own regulations and guidelines. Second thing is the cultural and social atmosphere of the clientele and the client population that you're hoping to serve. So by cultural social atmosphere, what I'm referring to is the reasonableness or the usefulness of video conferencing or telehealth in the provision of care. So there are some communities where behavioral health services are taboo still, and you're obviously aware of those. And the question you need to ask yourself is this person really comfortable doing a remote session when they're in the home, and are they concerned that maybe their family will find out, or that they'll be ostracized in that manner? And in that case, maybe that person is a better candidate for in-person services. Now, there's a whole stigma that goes along with going into the office, so you'll just have to talk with the client about those and really decide on a person-by-person basis whether or not remote care is the right avenue for them. Another thing to consider is the mental health status of the client. Obviously, if someone needs in-person care and needs a higher level of care that can't be provided remotely, that will be something that an influencing factor in whether or not you're able to provide the services remotely. And, it's always important to use your best clinical judgment. You do that every day, and it's no different when it comes to remote care. So I like to always caution people, because the question really is this individual, not just all of my clients, but this individual right for remote care, and how will that impact their safety and their long-term success as a patient? The same thing with their cognitive status and other health issues. If they're experiencing health issues for which they need to receive immediate care, then obviously meeting with them remotely may not be the right course of action. Maybe they need to be seen in person to evaluate other comorbidities or diagnosis they're currently experiencing symptoms for. And technical competence is always a concern. And it's a concern that I like to kind of be aware of, but also be mindful that technology is always getting easier to use. So almost every single one of your clients has access to a mobile phone. And if they don't, then they may know someone who does. And a mobile, all mobile devices are internet enabled nowadays, even if you have to use a Wi-Fi connection to get that internet connectivity. So there are some HIPAA concerns with that, and we'll talk about those in a little while. But most of your clients are going to be technically competent enough to click a button and join a remote session. So it's important that you find a software that offers that level of ease of use for your clients. And that's just in general. It's a good idea to vet the softwares out, and we'll talk about that as well. And then, of course, you want to decide whether or not you and your client base have the technical equipment or internet connectivity sufficient enough to join their session remotely or to participate in online care. And this is particularly important and comes in handy when you're talking about rural area clients where the internet connectivity could be very slow still. So for example, our software, we ask for a video session that there be 3 megabytes per second of upload and download speed, which isn't very much. Most Wi-Fi connections are at least 10 megabytes per second. But in rural areas, some places, still very limited connectivity. And even the service through the telephone, as opposed to DSL or broadband, can sometimes be better. So just ask your client how the internet is in their area. And if you know for sure that it's not good, then maybe an alternative means is appropriate. Next is thinking about which modalities and really researching what modalities you want to use. So of course there's video conferencing, which refers to live face-to-face video. It's audio and video happening at the same time. That's referred to as synchronous video conferencing. And there's a lot of clinical research behind video conferencing being just as efficacious as in-person sessions in most cases, and also less costly on the healthcare system as well as on the patients and providers. So with that in mind, video conferencing is a great option for modality. Now, you also have message therapy, telephonic sessions, and instant chat or instant message, which are also available on the market for you to use as modalities in coordinating and treating clients. However, all 3 of those really have less intensive and more limited clinical research backing them up. So no one has really done intensive studies on message therapy yet, although there are some in the works. There are a lot of proponents of that kind of therapy that say that it helps you to keep people accountable and to have a journalistic approach to care where you can refer back to notes and really make sure that everyone's on the same page. And for individuals who video conferencing may be too much out of their day, or that they don't have the hour to dedicate to you, that at least you can help them in some way, shape, or form through the message therapy. So there are a lot of good pros for why you might want to consider it, but it's typically not recommended as a single or a standalone treatment methodology. So the APA recommends that you actually use it in conjunction, if you're going to use it, with another type or modality of remote care. So just keep those things in mind. Of course, I'll give you some research so you can actually look into these issues and read these practice and best practice guidelines for yourself. Guidelines for your clients. You'll have to teach them how to treat you in the remote world, just as you would during an in-person world. So during an in-person world, you have office hours, times that you're available by phone, times that you allow sessions to be scheduled, and that does not change when you're seeing clients remotely. So you'll want to make sure that you're posting and explaining your working hours, your response parameters. If you do give the opportunity for your clients to reach out through messaging, you'll want to let them know what they can expect from you, so that you don't have to be replying 24 hours a day. I've heard from many providers that if you don't set this guideline and parameter and boundary in the beginning, that you will have clients that become increasingly anxious because they haven't heard back from you, and that could be negative. So if you let the client know, you can message me as many times in a day as you want, and I will respond to you 1 time per day. And you can even let them know, I typically am able to respond to messages and get to those messages between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m. or whatever those hours happen to be for you. Really important to communicate that ahead of time. Another thing you will want to teach them are what are the appropriate ways to communicate. So let's say you have a messaging tool that allows you to coordinate scheduling and talk about video conferencing sessions, but you don't want to use that messaging tool for the provision of care. You must make it apparent and clear to the client what is appropriate to discuss in the messages versus what should they keep relegated to a live session or a video session. So really important to give them guidelines about what is administrative, versus what is treatment related, and how to actually communicate those to you, what modes to use. And the more consistent that you are with this and the less you let them push back on you, the more harmonious your remote practice and your remote care will be. Next is it's really important to know what information to collect ahead of time from a client prior to establishing a remote relationship with them. Client residence and specifically where they plan to be when they're having video sessions with you is very important. So I recommend that you collect all of this information in writing ahead of time. Client residence is important because you'll want to be able to, and you'll see this down the line, look at where the residence is and what the emergency responder and maybe non-emergency numbers are for that area. Because if you're on with a client and they start, and there's an emergency, maybe they're expressing homicidal or suicidal ideation and you have to take the next step on that, then you'll want to know where to call, or maybe they're having a medical issue during your session. And if you call 911, that's not going to go to necessarily to the patient unless you're in the same area. It will go to your local services. So you'll want to know where to call in case of emergency. And at the beginning of a session, even though you've collected information ahead of time about where they say they will be, sometimes that can change, right? So I would always communicate to a client that they need to tell you where they're going to be for their sessions ahead of time, and that should be a stable place, a place that they are comfortable, is safe and secure, and they can be alone. But if something happens and the client happens to join a session and they're not in their normal place, you'll want to know about that, right? So the client, I would definitely ask at the beginning of a session, what is your current location? Just so you know that it's the same as either A, it's the same as where they usually say they're supposed to be, or B, it's somewhere different, and at least you know where they are. Another really interesting thing that some people don't think about is cohabitant information. So who in the home may be around them, who may have access to their device, or who may be influencing their care, and really understand that aspect, as well as for getting contact information for those people in case of emergency. So once you've thought about setting up your online practice for success, and really important to write all of those things down, the things that need to be communicated with your clients can be communicated virtually or in person if you have a brick and mortar office, but really writing those down, and then you'll want to communicate your expectations and boundaries. So communicate your practice guidelines, hours of operation, when your clients can expect responses. We talked about these things. What is your late cancellation no-show policy? Is that different from the brick and mortar side of things, or is it the same for your remote practice? And that's up to you, but obviously you'll need to communicate that to them as well. Scheduling guidelines, what modalities are appropriate, information requirements, and then of course payment requirements and policies. So for example, the Wecounsel platform gives you an opportunity to ask your clients to enter their credit card information and store that on file, and then you can bill it. You'll want to make them aware of that. So this brings up an interesting point, is that in many states, it's required that you have a specific express telemedicine informed consent, and every state has different requirements about what goes inside of that informed consent. General rule of thumb is to make sure that you're explaining the benefits and the cons of doing care remotely. And then of course, many providers, as you know, include some of these items in their informed consent as well. So really writing all of this down and deciding how you're going to disseminate it the easiest way to give it to your clients. For example, inside of our software, we have a tool that you can use to actually load your own PDFs You can send it to the client. They can actually remotely sign it without having to download it and send it back to you. No matter what software you use or what way that you plan to see the clients remotely, it's a good idea to have this in writing and to get them to sign off that they read it. Another thing that I would give to the client in writing are written intake instructions, which can be slightly different from the more administrative things that we discussed earlier. These things are maybe including the practice guidelines, but also can include technology requirements. So if you've chosen a software that does not allow iOS devices, for example, an iPhone or an iPad, and they have to be on a computer, then it's important that they know that. Our software is applicable and available for all devices, iOS, Android, and laptop or desktop computer, but some softwares are not. So it's important that you understand that and know that when you've chosen a software and you communicate those requirements. Another thing is, are there requirements for the browser version? Does it have to be a certain many years new? Or are you required to have a certain amount of internet connectivity? All of those things your clients are not going to know unless you tell them. So it's important to acquire that information from your software vendor and disseminate it, along with the website URL and the software they might need to download. For example, our software prompts and gives instructions on this when you add a new client in the registration process. But always having that understanding for yourself, being able to give that information to your clients is going to help you to smooth out the process and really make it a smooth transition for you. If you have anyone else that does administrative work for you, then it'll be important for them to understand that as well. Another thing is, what forms and assessments are they required to have completed before you can initiate in remote care? So some of this is going to be dependent on the regulatory requirements in your state, and other things are going to be your regular intake or pre-session forms that you like to have. I always recommend that your clients do a practice call, whether that's with you or with a software vendor. We offer those for clients, but not every software vendor does that. So always, always, always do a practice call ahead of time. It just really helps to ease the anxiety, and the client knows what to expect, and they know that this time is not cutting into their important time with you, which is really the important part. Technical support details, emergency instructions. Just like any other modality, you explain to the client what to do in case of an emergency, who to call, where to go, and this would be no different. So you'll want to communicate that ahead of time. If you offer packages, which a lot of providers do offer packages, like you can have one remote session and unlimited messaging in 1 month for how many dollars, you'll just want to make sure that they understand what the package is that they signed up for and what their expectations and requirements are. And then, of course, any insurance carriers that you may accept. Things to communicate for treatment, where they can journal or document their concerns securely. So educating the client on HIPAA compliance in general is always a good thing, because they may be very interested in protecting their PHI. So our software has a journaling component. It's inside of the browser-based portal, which means that it's HIPAA compliant as well, just like the rest of the software. But if the client wants to electronically take notes and kind of journal what's going on with them, of course, they can do it wherever they want. But it's nice to have someone advocating for your privacy. So it's nice to be able to explain that, there's a HIPAA compliant place for them to do it. What are the after hours or off hours procedures, right? So along with emergency procedure, but if you're not available after hours, what do I do? Of course, you're communicating these things for your brick and mortar clients, and it's important to communicate them for your remote clients. Otherwise, they will be trying to reach out to you remotely 24 hours a day. And then, of course, again, from a clinical perspective, what to do in case of an emergency. Again, pricing and service levels. I like to just dive into that a little deeper. because it's important that we're really communicating exactly what it is that the client is getting in their remote care for what you're charging. And so one of those things is what will they get, and then what are the terms. So if I tell my clients, if you or Friday between 2 and 4 p.m. If you pay me, if you agree to those charges every Friday, and if I charge you and it goes through, then you'll get the following week's services. See, that level of specificity is something that is needed for clients to be able to understand what their responsibilities are and be comfortable. And then another thing is, like, what service level does this offer them? So how many times are you going to respond via message? How many video conferencing sessions? How long is that session going to be? What happens if my session gets cut off for technical purposes? Do I get to make up that time with you, or is that just time in the trash? Your software provider is going to do a lot to try and make sure that your session goes smoothly, but internet connectivity affects everything, right? So always planning for the contingency that something possibly could happen during your session that causes it not to go off without a hitch. And it's important to plan for those things. So Tyler, I think this is a good time to just stop and ask if we have any questions so far.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so I don't see any as of right now, but I'm sure, as you're talking, I have things brewing in my head, there's a lot to digest for sure. So if you guys do have questions, please feel free to use the questions panel in the control panel there. Just go ahead and type in your question, and I'll be monitoring that as well throughout the.
Great. Well, we'll stop again at the end. So I just, want to remind you that this is interactive, and if you have questions about things that we're not talking about, feel free to ask those as well.
Absolutely.
Next, we're going to jump into video conferencing best practices. And this is where you can really make or break a session, right? So really making your clients comfortable, and you being comfortable, in fact, with how well everything is going is largely dependent on you taking some critical steps in the video conferencing session. So number one, most important thing, as I've said before, is practice, practice, practice. Make sure that you are doing practice calls, and I encourage everyone to try and do a practice call with, a family member or friend or someone else in the office, so that you can experience what this is like from your perspective and from your client's perspective. It's important to know what that feels like and to be able to explain and reiterate to them. If they have questions or if they're concerned about something, you will know every step of the process. Test the mode of communication, so if not only practicing video calls, but practice sending a message. Create a fake client account and send yourself a message, and then send a message back to yourself, and really understand what that's like. It's not just testing to make sure that the software works. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is testing the workflow and making sure that it works for you. Not only that it works for you, but that you understand and know what it's like to be in your client's shoes, and can help them through that if they're frustrated or if they have questions. Of course, your software provider is going to give you support, but the first person your clients are going to ask about something is always going to be you, right? So whether you direct them to the software provider for support or not, that's your prerogative. But if you have that background knowledge about what it feels like and how the process goes, then you can probably ease their minds a little quicker and easier than your vendor can. Another thing is really important is for you and for your clients, but especially you, to always keep your device and your software up to date. So if you have set everything to update automatically. Because what happens is, and many people don't know this. I didn't know this before I got into the tech side of things, but oftentimes things like your iOS or your version of your browser or your operating system will update, and that can cause the software that you're trying to use not to work correctly anymore if you don't have the latest version. And these updates can happen in the background without you knowing about them, for example. So if you go to your browser, and your browser is going to be your Chrome, your Firefox, your Internet Explorer. If you go to those browsers, you can set your settings to say automatically update. I would definitely do that if you have control over it. Another thing that you can always do is make sure that you're turning your device on and off regularly. So if you keep your computer browser open for too long, what will happen is it starts storing cookies. And cookies are little bits of information that help your browser to remember what you've seen before. And when those cookies become too old, they can start showing you bad data or things that are no longer relevant or correct. So the best way to stop that from happening is just to completely close out your internet browsers and maybe even completely shut down your device from time to time. And from time to time means, you know, once every day or once every other day, just to make sure that everything is running optimally. When you're about to start a video conferencing session, it's really important to turn all other forms of communication, especially anything that's open on your device, on your computer or iPhone or iPad, off before you start. And the reason is, let's say, for example, I have FaceTime open, and then I hop right off of a FaceTime call and start my video conferencing session on Wecounsel. What can happen is your computer can get confused and think that it's still connected to FaceTime, stopping it from really truly being able to connect to the video. And this can cause all sorts of problems. It can give you audio feedback issues. It can cause latency and choppiness in your video, even if it can stop your video session from happening altogether. And that's really not helpful. Another thing to be aware of and really turning off is not just what's on your device, but everything else in your office. So whether you have a home office or an office in a busy area with lots of people around, it's important to make sure that you're saying, okay, hey, there's a TV on over there, I'm going to shut that off. There's a phone that is not on vibrate or not on silent, and all these things can be distractions to me, and they can also be interfering with the quality of my session. And then also test your internet connectivity regularly. If you're getting weird or not great internet connectivity, you can call your internet service provider and ask them if there's a reason for that, and see if it's possible to increase your megabytes per second upload and download speed, and ask them what's the best strategy to go about doing that. The better your internet connectivity is, the better your video conferencing sessions will go every time. So if you're on wireless and you think, oh, my internet connectivity is just not great right now, if you can plug your device into the internet through a cable, DSL cable or fiber optic cable, then do that, because it will increase the quality of your session. Next is, really best practices for protecting PHI. And we're going to have some resources that really give you the guidelines from NASW and the APA, but here's some big points to remember. Always choose a safe, secure location without distractions, number one. If you're going to want to be in an office where no one else is around, or anyone else who is around has privileges and access to that PHI. Which means no telehealth in public. I get this question a lot. The consumer, your clients don't have any responsibility to protect their own session. But I would always recommend to the clients to be in a safe, secure location away from distractions and away from the public eye. But for you as a provider, providers ask me all the time, I'm traveling and they're going to be in a hotel or the airport or what have you, and they want to do these sessions, and they're saying, well, the internet is, and they're calling me because the internet is not great in that place or something. I'm like, whoa. What did you say? You're in the middle of the airport and you're trying to do a session? That is not HIPAA compliant, and it's not safe for the protection of the client's PHI. There's tons of people around you, and even just catching a glimpse of that video is personally identifying information. So just always keep that in mind, that you're in a secure location. It seems like it's a no-brainer, but it happens. And along with that, choose a comfortable, quiet area. So, and by comfortable, I mean a place where you feel like you're doing your best work and that you're at your best. And I would encourage your consumers to do the same. Always use a secure internet connection. So not only does your video vendor have to be HIPAA compliant, the internet connection that you're using should be encrypted or at least password protected as well. Which means that, let's say for example, you're in your home and you're connecting to your Wi-Fi, you're going to want to make sure that there's a password on it. That way your neighbor or a crazy hacker guy across the street is not going to be able to access that internet line, because the internet connectivity is a direct line into your device. So if I can connect to your internet, I can connect to your computer. Just keep that in mind. No PHI visible in the screen. So let's say you are on a video conferencing call, but behind you is your work computer. And on that work computer, you have a list of clients open. That's not great, right? So you'll want to make sure that anything that's visible in your view of your camera, which is why it's also a really great idea to practice in the place where you plan to do your session, is not containing any PHI, and your clients are not going to see any of that. Now, if it's underneath of your table or inside of the drawers, that's one thing. Nobody can see that, but just make sure it's out of the view of the camera. And then, of course, no distractions in the background. So the more patterns and colors and pictures and things that you have inside of your video feed, the more bandwidth of your internet connection it's going to take up. And this can cause something called latency. And latency is when you get that choppy thing that's happening and it's like, you know, like it used to be on the phone, it was like, can you hear me now? But now it's like in video, it stops every few seconds and you're still saying, can you hear me now? And it's just not working. Well, to minimize that, wear solid colors, not bright colors. So you're like your lime greens and your hot pinks, those are gonna take up more bandwidth, believe it or not. Patterns on your clothes are not the best for video conferencing because they take up bandwidth. And then be cognizant of what's behind your head. So if the consumer is looking at you and you've got a busy picture behind you or an avant-garde abstract piece of art, that's, I'm sure, beautiful, but it can take up some of your bandwidth. So that could affect the quality of your session, and we definitely want to have good quality sessions. Securing your device of choice. So if you're having, and this is something, you know, general HIPAA, right? But I always like to point it out because if you're doing your video or remote sessions on your computer, like for example, Wecounsel will automatically time you out if you leave your desk and walk away and forget to log out. But that doesn't happen for 15 minutes. So if in that 15 minutes, who has access to your workstation? Are they a person who's authorized to have access to this PHI? Of course, like we discussed, the internet connectivity needs to be password protected, and you should encrypt and password protect your actual device. So most computers have an encryption feature. I know if you use a Mac, that encrypts automatically when you set it up and asks you for a password to protect it. And you have those settings on PCs as well. Your phone nowadays, you can do a fingerprint, which is very secure, or even just a password will make it more secure. Never download anything onto a non-protected or non-secure device. Just don't do it. And then handling transfer of sensitive protected health information. Always use a HIPAA compliant medium to transfer PHI. So that means your email, if it's not encrypted, is not HIPAA compliant, and you shouldn't use it to transfer PHI, even if the client is asking you to do so. I mean, they can ask you, they can send you information, but I would always just let them know that you want to use a HIPAA compliant medium to send the information back to them. And discuss with your clients why you don't use email to discuss sensitive information. They can send you sensitive information. There's no law against that. But when you respond, you're actually, putting that PHI at risk from your perspective. So I would always just respond back and let them know, hey, I don't actually use email to communicate about treatment. So I'm going to follow up with you in a secure message. And if you use Wecounsel, we have a secure messaging tool that will send a notification to your email and to the client's email, but then they'll be prompted to log in to see the message. So that's a good way to do it. And never, of course, download any PHI on an unsecured device. Other tips, wear headphones. Headphones will cut back on a lot of the audio issues, echoing, and weird things that can happen. Wear solid colors. Choose a well-lit area so that the client can see your face. I can't tell you how many times I've spoken with someone and the client is looking at the camera, but the provider's face is not well lit, so they can't see anything. And then know where your camera is. That's really important. If your camera is on the bottom or near the table, you'll want to look down. If it's up at the top of the computer, you'll want to look directly into the camera, because the client is going to be looking at that and wanting to feel like you're engaging with them directly. And then practice ahead of time. Again, practice, practice, practice. So now that we've talked about kind of, how to set it up and really doing your best work remotely and knowing the things to look out for when you're providing remote care, let's talk about transitioning care. So this means, are you tracking progress through online treatment? Are you systematically recording the progress of the client? Chances are you're using the same tools that you would for the provision of in-person care, but is that showing you, is that system or tool that you're using showing you progress? Well, maybe if it's not showing you progress, it's time to consider in-person care. So if you're using a method to systematically track the progress and the person isn't improving, is it possible that in-person care would be appropriate for them? Maybe. So that's, based on your best clinical judgment. And there are a lot of good tools and resources out there. I'll flash on the screen in a moment that will help you and to read up about this kind of thing and really learn how to evaluate that. So is your client reaching their goals? Maybe they want to transition to an in-person. Maybe they're ready to graduate into that. And they were doing remote care as a way to ease themselves into treatment or ease themselves into seeing a clinician. So those are all things to think about. Have the needs of the client changed? Have they had a level of care need change? Are they declining physically? Are there other comorbidities that require them to seek in-person services? Or do they just like online treatment? Well, some people start it and they say, this is going to be more convenient for me or what have you. And then they ultimately end up saying to themselves, I would rather see someone in person. And that's okay. But ask them. It's important to get their perspective on how they are liking it. And the truth is most of your clients will tell you whether or not they like or dislike the remote care aspect. Has their physical location changed or has yours? This is important. If your client moves to another state right now and you're not doing case management, so we're talking about clinical treatment right now. So case management really doesn't have the state boundaries like the clinical side does. But if their physical location has changed and you are licensed in one place and they have moved to another state that you're not licensed in, then you'll need to refer them on to a practitioner in that state. Very important to know. And then has your location changed, which sometimes that could be okay. So I know a lot of people that use remote telehealth to actually be able to maintain relationships in their licensed state, but they've moved away from that state. So I know several providers who live in Costa Rica and France and, moved from, I don't know, California to Washington or what have you, and they're seeing their clients that are in their original state of licensure, which is legal as long as you still maintain your licensure in that state. And then, of course, always use your best clinical judgment, access your resources and your tools for that. So speaking of resources, competence in telemental health best practices through education is key. You know, you want to make yourself aware. And here's some resources that you can use. I'm going to keep this page up for a little while just to make sure that you can see it. But these are really good resources for you. So telehealth.org /ethical statements. Telehealth.org is a great website in general, and it's going to have a lot of information for you about telehealth. But the ethical statements piece of this, and this is in your handouts. So if you're still on the webinar with us and you go to your GoToWebinar control panel in the bottom right-hand corner, you're going to see handouts. You can download this PowerPoint right now, and it will have this in it, okay? And there's links to it, so you can click on the link and get to the website. APA best practices for telepsychology. Whether or not you're a psychologist, the APA is a really good organization that put together some great guidelines, and so this is something that you can use as an ancillary resource. Center for Connected Health Policy. The Center for Connected Health Policy their goal is to make telehealth a thing. And what that means is they want to get regulations cut down, you know, and really get to the meat of let's use this to help people and let's get it going. And they have a telemental health research catalog that kind of aggregates all of the clinical data. Some of the things that I was talking about earlier can be found there. And this is a really nice catalog if you're concerned or curious about how efficacious live video is in certain treatment models. Look at this catalog because it covers almost everything. I mean, it covers adolescent ADHD, it covers elderly identification and treatment of depression, it covers use of telemedicine in long-term care settings, it covers it in private practice, remote care areas. I mean, it really the catalog has a lot of good, juicy details. And then finally, the NASW Code of Ethics, which does address treatment of sensitive information, which is pertinent not only in telehealth, but across the board. So we're going to open it up to questions for the last 10 minutes or so of this webinar. And I think we're almost right on time to hit the 50-minute mark here, but I do want to tell you about the partnership between Wecounsel and NASW Pennsylvania. You can get 1 month free of our software. The professional plan is the plan that we offer for individual practitioners, and we also have a plan for large organizations if your organization wants to use telehealth, and this will go for both of those. So 1 month free plus 25% off, period, for your subscription going forward if you sign up using NASW-PA 25 as your coupon code. You're going to get a directory listing as a private practitioner inside of the Wecounsel directory, which will help to market your services if you're in private practice. And we work towards making you more visible online and hopefully sending you some new client referrals. First class customer service. Our customer service team, we do amazing email support. If you email in, they're helping you and they're on top of it. And HIPAA compliant security. We have an encrypted 256-bit AES encrypted platform. We offer BAA with every single provider, business associate agreement, and that's really important to us that we're maintaining the top of HIPAA compliance for you. To sign up or to learn more, you can go to marketing.wecounsel.com/NASW-PA. Again, that's marketing.wecounsel.com/NASW-PA. And if you have any questions, not on the screen, but I'm just going to shout out our phone number. You can talk to our sales team at 888-958-2885. So 888-958-2885. Option 1 will give you the sales department. So now that we've kind of gone over that and you know about the offer, Tyler, have we had anybody that's kind of chimed in with any questions?
Yes, we have. That last bit there, I think everybody was waiting to get into their questions. So we have about 6 to get through. We'll try to do what we can in the next few minutes here. So let's just start with number 1. Are there any differences in the fee schedules for telehealth sessions versus face-to-face?
What a great question. Yeah, and the reimbursement is something that's always a hot topic, so I'm sure we're going to have some questions about that. So there's something called a parity in the state of Pennsylvania, which means that telehealth or remote services, when covered by your payer, so if your payer covers remote services, they have to cover it at the same levels as in-person services. So I know the state of Pennsylvania has enacted a parity law. Some states haven't. Most states have, though. I think 43 or 42 or 43 out of the 50 states have some law in place that says that when the CPT code is covered via telemedicine, then it has to be paid out at the same level. And so most providers that I talk to, if they're charging private pay, will actually just charge the same amount for the remote session. And it's still beneficial to your client to do the remote care because it's more flexible for them, right? And they can join you remotely without having to invest the time and resources it takes to come into an office. So I hope that answered your question.
Great, yeah. Also, if an in-person established client travels out of state or country and requests a session, can therapists still provide services even though they are only licensed in one state? I think this is talking about temporary travel, but it might also be talking about permanently traveling. Yeah, what about that?
Yeah, so obviously you're going to want to consult your association on, like interstate licensure issues. But the general rule of thumb is if someone moves out of state or moves to another country, you need to relocate them with a provider that is licensed in their new geographic location. But cool. There is kind of a gray area around temporary or, for continuity of care at times, it is appropriate to see someone who is not in their normal state or location. And there isn't a lot of evidence that the government is just going after people who are doing this on a one-off basis to maintain continuity of care, to see someone and maintain their regular treatment cycle. I would always consult with your professional licensure board and get their opinion about this. But I haven't seen anything where, they're really coming down about that kind of thing. This is all still emerging as a mode of treatment, and there are a lot of people that are advocating for interstate licensure across the board because of that reason, because remote care allows you to kind of establish relationships and continue to see clients even after they're far away from you. So it's all kind of evolving, and I would definitely just consult with your professional licensure board and always, where possible, observe that good rule of thumb of only practicing where your license is valid and acknowledged.
Great, yeah, that's a great piece of advice there. Also, we did have somebody ask again how to download the handouts. I'll just go ahead and say it again. There's a handout section in the control panel here. So you should see that, a little drop-down box, and you should be able to just download. It's a PDF of the slide deck from today. So all that information is there. We are also recording this webinar, and we'll be putting it up on our website soon after we complete this session. So you should be able to get this information again if you need to review. Abby, another question here. Are any telehealth services eligible for insurance reimbursement, specifically mental health therapists? I guess we already kind of talked about that, didn't we? But I don't know if you have anything to add.
We did. I think that's a little bit of a different question because the question is, is it the same rates? But this question is really asking, are my psychotherapy codes or my clinical medical management codes, are these codes eligible for reimbursement by private payers? And the answer is that regardless of what your state is doing or what the Medicare is doing, private payers want you to do telehealth. And so they, Aetna, Cigna, Magellan, all of the bigger behavioral health payers have special contractual reimbursement for telehealth, and for behavioral health in particular is a focus for all of them. So the best way to find out if your contracted payers reimburse for telehealth is to look at your contract, your fee schedule, and also you can reach out to them. They're encouraging, I know Aetna and Cigna in particular have a national coverage for behavioral CPT codes for telehealth. for any provider who falls under the licensure eligible for those particular CPTs. So you'll just want to call them and ask, and that's the only way to really know for sure. I don't want to say like yes under your particular license for this CPT code, because those things are changing all the time. I can't even stay up to date on the new codes and the new licensures that are being added to the reimbursement schedule because it's happening so rapidly. So always just call and check.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's a lot to keep up with. I did see here somebody ask if you recommend any liability insurance that covers telehealth therapy. As an NASW employee, I will say NASW Assurance Services is one that you guys as NASW members have access to. I know they do sort of cyber related and malpractice insurances and that kind of thing. So you might want to check that out. I'll put the link in the chat. I don't know if you have any other ones though you'd add, Abby.
I try to stay away from recommending professional liability because I do know that the associations really vet these, very carefully and make good recommendations. So I always recommend that you check with your association. So I'm going to leave it up to you on this one.
All right. Well, you checked with me, and I said Assurance Services, so definitely check that out. That's probably a safe bet. They are specific to NASW members, so I would absolutely encourage you guys, since you already are paying for your membership and everything, to contact them, get in touch, and see if they have what kind of offerings they have, and if that meets what you're looking for. And then the last question here, Abby, just can you kind of talk about the rates for Wecounsel after the month free?
Yeah, absolutely. So Wecounsel is now offering a plan called the professional plan. So we have two different plans. One of them is free and one of them is paid. The free plan gets you unlimited Meet Now video conferencing capabilities and a free directory listing. So you could always, if you start the free trial and you say, I don't need all this extra stuff, you can always choose to stay on that free plan and continue to use our Meet Now video function, which is HIPAA compliant, and list yourself in the Wecounsel directory if you want. But our paid plan has lots and lots of bells and whistles that you're going to want to know about and try and see. And that plan is called the professional plan. It's available for $100 a month, but your discount actually allows you to take advantage of that plan for $75 a month indefinitely. And that gives you the e-sign capability. You can load your own forms and assessments, send them directly to your clients. They can fill them out online and send them back to you, and no download has to take place. So this really, really enhances and optimizes your remote care services. It also has unlimited secure email and document storage and sharing. So you can literally manage your entire workload, practice, client management on Wecounsel. We have large enterprise organizations that they do everything on our platform. So they manage everything within our platform. So it can meet your needs if you're all the way on that side of the spectrum, but we also have that free plan to meet your needs if all you need is just a couple of video sessions, one here or there. So check it out. I would encourage you to visit marketing.wecounsel.com/NASW-PA. You can read about and learn about our plans. Definitely sign up for the free trial. There's no risk. And if you decide it's not for you, you don't have to stay with it. And it's a good way to just kind of get exposed to what's out there, what's available.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you so much, Abby. Definitely appreciate all the information today. I know we're kind of running out of time here. You guys have Wecounsel's information. You have the slide deck here. If you want to download that before we end, definitely look over that information again. There was a lot to take in. I know I learned a lot. Check out our website. It's probably where you went to register for this webinar, was nasw-pa.org/webinars. We have these every month, so sign up for the next one as soon as that's up. Also, that's where we're going to be posting the recording from this session. So if you guys want to just kind of review this information, that's a good place to go. And you always have NASW-PA staff's contact information if you have any other questions, and we can get you in touch with Wecounsel if needed as well. So I hope you guys learned something. We definitely appreciate you joining us. And Abby, I just want to thank you again so much for all the great information.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thanks for coming, and I look forward to talking with you all very soon. Give us a call or join on the website.